This program features two staples of the quartet repertoire, plus a lesser-known work. Two composers who died far too young, one at 41, the other at just 31, and another who lived a very full life. 77 was pretty good for the 18th century. You're going to hear Haydn's Opus 20 number 5, Fanny Mendelssohn's one and only string quartet, followed by the epic Death and the Maiden quartet of Schubert. You're in for a treat. The 6 Haydn Opus 20 quartets, written in 1772, were known as the Sun Quartets, a name that stuck from the first Hummel edition in 1779, printed with a large sun on the front cover. Musicologist Donald Tovey said of these quartets, "Every page of the 6 quartets of Opus 20 is of historical and aesthetic importance. Perhaps no single opus in the history of instrumental music has achieved so much." With these 6 works, Haydn really established the string quartet as a genre of its own. He showcased the extreme versatility of the medium, incorporating chorales, fugues, improvisation, and extreme virtuosity. He varies the grouping of the instruments throughout, beginning with the expected 1+3 melody plus accompaniment, but quickly breaking out into extended interjections where the 4 players take on increasingly independent roles. In the opening F minor movement, he takes a relatively simple tune through a range of different settings. We hear pathos, tenderness, and improvisation, all within a relatively compact form. The last movement, like 2 other quartets in the set, is a fugue. There's no real leader here, it's every player for themselves. In this nod to the Baroque era, he offers 2 subjects marked sotto voce, or soft voice, but at the very end, he bumps the marking up to fortissimo, leaving us on the edge of our seats. But Haydn didn't really conjure the quartet out of nowhere. He wrote 33, that's right, 33 quartets before these Opus 20s. Talk about dedication. He went on to write 68 quartets in all, a staggering achievement. We won't go into detail about the 104 symphonies, 52 piano sonatas, and 26 operas, but suffice it to say, Haydn's work ethic puts even the best of us to shame today. His friends called him Papa Haydn, and although we can thank him for founding the quartet, we can even thank him for establishing the classical style itself. The nickname Papa sprung from the fact that he was unusually benevolent and protective of his fellow musicians. He was quite a nice guy. His wife might not have agreed, though. They famously didn't get along. There were mistresses, etc. But that's another tale for another time. Haydn assembled the very best musicians at Esterhazy, and thanks to Haydn's obsequious yet persuasive exchanges with his boss, these musicians were the best paid around. Haydn lived through the French Revolution, through Napoleon's conquest, and even witnessed the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire when Francis II abdicated in 1806, an empire that had been in place for over 1,000 years. It was truly a dynamic time, and although Haydn was very much grounded in the classical style, he personified it, he was always inventive, always thinking ahead. The myriad ways he fragmented, dissected, and reassembled the same themes paved the way for Beethoven in particular, and for generations to come. With the possible exception of the Rothschilds, the Mendelssohns were the most famous Jewish family in all of Europe. Fanny's grandfather, Moses Mendelssohn, was the most well-known Jewish thinker since Spinoza, and the founder of Reform Judaism as we know it today. There were successful bankers on both her mother's and father's sides, and not long after the Prussian emancipation of the Jews, Fanny's uncle Jakob established the Mendelssohn and Company Bank, which would later become one of the most successful in all of Europe. Tragically, the Nazis later forced them to sell their assets to Deutsche Bank, but I digress. Fanny was the oldest of 4 children. Her brother Felix was second in line. Both of them must have had IQs off the charts. They were truly Wunderkinder. By age 13, Fanny had memorized the entire Well-Tempered Clavier of Bach, 24 preludes and fugues. This would be a remarkable COVID project for any prize-winning pianist today, someone 3 times her age. But for a 13-year-old girl who'd never played in public, it was nearly unthinkable. Both Fanny and Felix spoke 4 languages and excelled in mathematics. They were even accomplished at painting and drawing. All 4 Mendelssohn children were baptized as Christians with the name Bartholdy. Like many upper middle class Jews of their day, the father Abraham was determined to assimilate. He was convinced a new surname would pave the way to success. History shows that Fanny's dad was probably naive. Richard Wagner offered uncensored disdain for Mendelssohn's music, and of course, the Nazis banned it altogether. But Europe's views had softened toward Jews during the early 19th century with a string of emancipations, and Fanny's father saw it as a way out. Both Fanny and Felix had the best tutors from a very early age. They were very close and always supportive of each other. Felix later nicknamed her Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, as he trusted her advice above all others. Both played piano extremely well, though by his own admission, it seems that Fanny may have surpassed her brother at the keyboard. And both composed over 500 compositions for Fanny, the vast majority of which have never been published during her lifetime or even heard outside of her home. Their composition teacher, Karl Zelter, bestowed the most backhanded compliment he could muster back then, saying that Fanny plays like a man. In 1829, Fanny married Prussian court painter Wilhelm Hensel. He was hugely supportive of his wife, encouraging her to publish, perform, and meet other musicians. The Mendelssohn family, however, had a most ambivalent attitude towards Fanny's talent. On the one hand, they offered her the best education possible, but in their minds, music was never meant to be a career. Her father Abraham stated it rather bluntly in a letter early on. Music will perhaps become Felix's profession. Well, for you, it can and only be an ornament. Felix's friend Henry Chorley later wrote, "Had Madame Hensel been a poor man's daughter, she might have been known by the side of Madame Schumann or Madame Pleyel." It seems the same resources which hastened Felix's development only shackled Fanny in the end. Despite being one of the most accomplished pianists of her day, Fanny only performed in public 3 times during her life. There were countless musical soirees, of course, but only 3 public performances. She made her debut in 1838, playing her brother's first piano concerto. She went on to travel to Italy with her husband, Wilhelm, where she met Charles Gounod, the new recipient of the Prix de Rome. He was very enthusiastic, and that boosted her confidence quite a bit. On a subsequent visit to London, Felix played one of Fanny's piano pieces for Queen Victoria, who absolutely loved it. But when the Queen asked about the composition, Felix begrudgingly admitted, in fact, that it was his sister's. In March of 1847, Fanny met Clara Schumann, the other great pianist-composer of their day. They instantly took a liking to each other, studying each other's piano trios. But sadly, this friendship never developed very far. Just 2 months later, Fanny died from a stroke while rehearsing one of Felix's cantatas. She was only 41. Felix himself died just 6 months later under very similar circumstances. Rarely in the history of music, or any art form for that matter, has such talent developed at such an early age. The tragedy, of course, is that we will never know the heights Fanny might have reached had she enjoyed the public acclaim of her brother. She lived in his shadow, even though she cherished his advice. Franz Schubert was born to humble beginnings. His father was a Moravian immigrant to Vienna and expected Franz to follow in his own schoolteacher footsteps. But as you might have guessed, Franz had other ambitions. He captured the attention of Antonio Salieri at a very young age. Remember the movie Amadeus? And he was subsequently enrolled as a Wunderknaben in something much like today's Vienna's boy choir, where he received the best instruction possible in piano, violin, and composition from Salieri and others. His voice inevitably broke, and he was forced to leave his Wunderknaben program. His father then persuaded him to become a schoolteacher, at least for a while, but teaching never really worked out. Franz was hopeless at disciplining the kids, and he really just wanted to compose all the time. At 18, he fell head over heels for his next-door neighbor, Teresa Grob, but finances prevented him from marrying her. You see, in 1816, Austria had enacted laws which essentially prevented the poor from marrying. Grooms were required to demonstrate a stable income before the government would sign off on the wedding. It was one of several of Francis II's policies designed to prevent uprising. He was paranoid about revolt. Defeated, Schubert left Teresa behind along with the school teaching and embarked on a career as a freelance composer. A bold move even today. Much like Fanny Mendelssohn, who of course came later, much of Schubert's compositions were performed only in salons during his life. The Schubertiade was very much a thing. Just imagine lots of wine, incredible music, and left-leaning political discussions that went on late into the night. He was greeted with consistent enthusiasm as the works poured out week after week. There was only one problem, really. Most of Schubert's audience was just as broke as he was. His main interest, after all, was really composing, not fame or financial success. He single-handedly elevated the Lied, or song, to an art form, taking simple tunes and giving them masterful settings that are as succinct in their instrumental writing as they are expansive in the breadth of their phrases. His music is elegant, subtle, and always lyrical. It's no surprise that his string writing, the quartets, the celebrated cello quintet, and the octet, remain at the very peak of the chamber music repertoire. Schubert was likely bisexual. It's still a matter of scholarly debate. But what we do know for sure is that despite his short stature, he was quite popular at these Schubertiades. Censorship was quite common in early 19th century Austria. You see, after Francis II took the throne in 1804, his aunt Marie Antoinette was beheaded just 1 month into his reign. So, as you might imagine, he was terrified of revolt and keeping his wits about him, so to speak. The prospect of tipsy young intellectuals meeting behind closed doors must have been terrifying. Books were banned, letters were intercepted, etc. And in 1820, one of Schubert's parties was raided. He spent the night in jail while his poet friend Johann Zehn was banished to his native Tyrol. Schubert contracted syphilis at age 25 and died at a mere 31. Much like his idol Beethoven, his music was permeated by themes of fate. From his early hit Erlkönig, written when he was just 18, we already hear the visions of a young man who meets an early demise. But nowhere is fate more prominent than in his Death in the Maiden quartet. Written in 1824, the second movement of this quartet is based on a song with the same name, written in 1817. The song depicts a dialogue between a young maiden and death. The maiden pleads, "Pass by, you cruel skeleton. I am still young. Leave me untouched." To which death replies, "Give me your hand, you pretty sweet creature. I have not come to punish you. Be of good courage, for I am not cruel. Gently in my arms you shall sleep." The opening fortissimo octaves in the first movement and subsequent pianissimo responses are both as brilliant and ominous as it gets. Foreboding permeates the entire work, with frequent tender moments and intermittent pleading. The piece ends with a tarantella, the traditional dance thought to ward off death. Schubert declined swiftly in his late 20s. In the days before antibiotics, there was no treatment for syphilis, at least not a good one. They gave patients mercury, which probably caused more problems than the disease itself. He died just 2 months shy of his 32nd birthday, having produced enough work for 10 lifetimes. Most of his music was found in his flat after his death, unpublished. Robert Schumann found the Ninth Symphony. Felix Mendelssohn subsequently edited it. And with over 600 songs, 9 symphonies, lengthy ones at that, 7 operas, 9 masses, 15 string quartets, and more, Schubert left an impact that lasted for generations to come.